She stood at the military base's main entrance, her worn civilian clothes a stark contrast to the crisp uniforms around her. The guards laughed openly, their voices carrying across the concrete plaza as they pointed at the young woman clutching a manila folder to her chest. "Another wannabe trying to get inside," one sneered. "Probably thinks she can waltz in here and change everything." What they didn't know was that inside that folder lay credentials that would make their commanding officers stand at attention. What they couldn't see was the steel determination forged by years of ridicule, rejection, and relentless pursuit of excellence. What they failed to recognize was that this woman, dismissed as just another civilian at the gate, possessed the authority to shut down their entire operation with a single phone call. Sometimes the most powerful people come in the most unexpected packages. Sometimes those who appear weakest hold the keys to everything. And sometimes those who laugh first find themselves explaining their behavior to someone they never saw coming. This is the true story of Dr. Ridiculed. Sarah Chen, the woman who walked through mockery to claim her rightful place in history, and how one moment of underestimation changed everything for everyone involved. Sarah Chen never intended to become the most feared name in military circles. Growing up in a small immigrant family in Ohio, she was simply the quiet girl who spent her lunch breaks in the library while other kids played outside. Her parents, both engineers who had fled China in the 1980s, instilled in her a belief that education was the only path to security in America. They worked double shifts at a manufacturing plant, saving every penny for Sarah's college fund, never once complaining about the sacrifices required. From an early age, Sarah showed an unusual aptitude for mathematics and computer science. While her classmates struggled with basic algebra, she was teaching herself calculus from borrowed textbooks. Her high school guidance counselor, Mrs. Rodriguez, noticed Sarah's potential but worried about her social isolation. The girl seemed to live in a world of numbers and algorithms, rarely speaking unless directly questioned about her work. The ridicule started early. Classmates called her Robot Girl because of her methodical approach to everything and her apparent inability to engage in small talk. During group projects, she often completed the entire assignment herself, rather than deal with the frustration of explaining complex concepts to peers who seemed more interested in socializing than learning. Teachers praised her work but worried about her lack of social connections. Sarah learned to wear her isolation like armor, convincing herself that their opinions didn't matter as long as her grades remained perfect. When Sarah graduated valedictorian at 17, she had already been accepted to MIT with a full scholarship. Her parents wept with joy at the graduation ceremony, finally seeing their American dream taking shape. But even as Sarah walked across the stage to thunderous applause, she could hear whispered comments from some classmates about how she had no life outside of books and predictions that she would never survive in the real world. College brought new challenges, but also new opportunities. At MIT, Sarah found herself surrounded by brilliant minds for the first time. Initially, this was overwhelming. She discovered that being the smartest person in the room was no longer guaranteed. Her freshman year was a humbling experience, as she struggled to keep up with peers who seemed to effortlessly grasp concepts that required intense study for her to master. The competitive atmosphere at MIT was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. Students formed study groups that felt more like intellectual battlegrounds. Sarah often found herself excluded from these groups, partly due to her introverted nature, and partly because some students found her direct communication style off-putting. She had a habit of pointing out errors in logic or methodology without considering how her corrections might affect others' confidence. During her sophomore year, Sarah made her first real friend. Marcus Williams was a computer engineering major from Detroit who shared her passion for cybersecurity. Unlike her high school classmates, Marcus appreciated Sarah's analytical mind and wasn't intimidated by her intelligence. They spent countless hours in the computer lab, working on projects that went far beyond their coursework requirements. It was Marcus who first suggested that Sarah consider applying her skills to national security. He showed her articles about cyber warfare and the growing need for experts who could protect critical infrastructure from digital attacks. Sarah was initially skeptical, viewing government work as bureaucratic and limiting. She had always imagined herself in private industry, possibly starting her own tech company. But as she delved deeper into cybersecurity research, Sarah began to understand the scope of threats facing the country. Foreign hackers were constantly probing American networks, looking for vulnerabilities in everything from power grids to military communications. The existing security measures seemed inadequate, often implemented by people who understood the technical requirements but lacked the creative thinking necessary to anticipate novel attack vectors. Sarah's junior year project changed everything. Working with a team of graduate students, she developed a new approach to network security that could adapt in real time to emerging threats. The system used machine learning algorithms to identify patterns in attempted intrusions and automatically implement countermeasures. Her professor, Dr. Rokarviksbacker, Elizabeth Carter, was so impressed that she arranged for Sarah to present her findings at a national cybersecurity conference. The presentation was Sarah's first exposure to the broader security community. She found herself in a room full of professionals from various government agencies, defense contractors, and academic institutions. Many of the attendees were twice her age, with decades of experience in the field. Sarah felt intimidated but determined to prove that her youth didn't diminish the value of her ideas. Her presentation went better than expected. The audience was clearly impressed by the sophistication of her approach, and several people approached her afterward with questions about implementation possibilities. One man, who introduced himself only as Agent Morrison from Washington, seemed particularly interested in her work. He gave her a business card and suggested that she might consider opportunities in government service after graduation. Sarah was flattered by the attention but remained focused on her academic goals. She had been accepted into MIT's doctoral program and planned to spend the next 4 years developing her security framework into something that could protect entire national infrastructures. The idea of working for the government still seemed limiting, despite Agent Morrison's assurances that she would have access to resources and challenges unavailable in the private sector. During her senior year, world events began to shift Sarah's perspective. A major cyber attack on the nation's financial networks caused widespread disruption, freezing bank accounts and causing panic in the stock market. The attack was sophisticated, using techniques that existing security systems couldn't counter effectively. Sarah watched the news coverage with growing frustration, knowing that her adaptive security framework could have prevented much of the damage. The attack's aftermath brought numerous job offers from private security firms, all promising substantial salaries and signing bonuses. Sarah's parents urged her to take one of these positions, arguing that she had already sacrificed enough for her education and deserved financial security. But Sarah found herself increasingly drawn to the idea of using her skills to serve something larger than profit margins. The decision crystallized during a conversation with her thesis advisor, Dr. Carter. They were discussing the ethical implications of cybersecurity research when Dr. Carter mentioned that the most critical infrastructures often had the least adequate protection because government budgets couldn't compete with private sector salaries for top talent. This created a dangerous situation where the nation's most vital systems were protected by well-meaning but underqualified personnel. Sarah realized that her skills could make a genuine difference in national security, but only if she was willing to work within the system rather than criticizing it from the outside. She contacted Agent Morrison and expressed interest in government opportunities. He arranged for her to meet with representatives from several agencies, including the Department of Defense, the Department of Homeland Security, and the National Security Agency. The interview process was unlike anything Sarah had experienced. Beyond demonstrating technical competence, she had to undergo extensive background checks and psychological evaluations. Some of the questions seemed designed to test her loyalty and discretion rather than her abilities. Sarah found the process somewhat invasive, but understood the necessity given the sensitive nature of the work. The breakthrough came when she was invited to tour a classified facility where researchers were working on next-generation defense systems. Sarah was amazed by the scope of the projects and the resources available to researchers. She also noticed significant gaps in their cybersecurity approaches, areas where her adaptive framework could provide substantial improvements. Dr. Barbatreya, Jennifer Walsh, the facility's director, was impressed by Sarah's insights during the tour. Unlike many young researchers who were overwhelmed by the complexity of defense work, Sarah immediately grasped both the technical challenges and the broader strategic implications. Dr. Walsh offered Sarah a position as a junior researcher, with the understanding that exceptional performance could lead to rapid advancement. Sarah accepted the offer despite lower pay than her private sector alternatives. Her parents were disappointed but eventually came to understand her decision. Marcus, now working for a major tech company, thought she was making a mistake but promised to stay in touch. Sarah's professors were proud that their student was choosing service over profit, even as they worried that bureaucracy might stifle her creativity. The transition from academic life to government work proved challenging in unexpected ways. Sarah was accustomed to the relatively informal atmosphere of university research, where ideas could be debated freely and hierarchy was based primarily on intellectual merit. The defense establishment operated under much stricter protocols, with clear chains of command, and procedures that seemed designed to slow down rather than accelerate innovation. Sarah's first assignment involved analyzing the security vulnerabilities in a communications network used by overseas military bases. The existing assessment had concluded that the system was adequately protected, but Sarah's analysis revealed several potential attack vectors that had been overlooked. Her report recommended significant upgrades that would require substantial time and money to implement. The response to Sarah's findings was mixed. Some senior researchers appreciated the thoroughness of her analysis, while others questioned whether someone with so little experience should be suggesting major changes to established systems. Sarah found herself caught between those who valued her fresh perspective and those who viewed her as an overconfident newcomer who didn't understand the practical constraints of defense work. The situation became more complicated when Sarah's recommendations were proven correct. A penetration test conducted by the agency's Red Team successfully exploited one of the vulnerabilities she had identified, gaining access to sensitive communications data. The test results vindicated Sarah's analysis, but created embarrassment for the senior personnel who had initially dismissed her concerns. Rather than celebrating her success, Sarah found herself increasingly isolated within the organization. Some colleagues began treating her with suspicion, viewing her as someone who made them look incompetent. Others seemed to resent her rapid advancement and the attention she received from senior leadership. Sarah realized that technical competence alone wasn't sufficient for success in this environment. She needed to develop political skills to navigate the complex dynamics of government work. The isolation was familiar, but still painful. Sarah had hoped that working with highly educated professionals would be different from her experiences in high school and college. Instead, she discovered that intelligence and education didn't necessarily eliminate petty jealousies and insecurities. If anything, the stakes seemed higher because everyone's career depended on maintaining their reputation for competence. Sarah began to understand that her directness, which had served her well in academic settings, was often perceived as arrogance in the workplace. When she pointed out flaws in colleagues' work or suggested improvements to existing systems, her comments were sometimes interpreted as personal attacks rather than professional observations. She started to modify her communication style, learning to present criticism more diplomatically and to acknowledge others' contributions, even when she had done most of the work herself. Despite the interpersonal challenges, Sarah's technical reputation continued to grow. Her adaptive security framework was attracting attention from high-level officials who understood its potential impact on national defense capabilities. She was invited to brief senior military leaders on her research, opportunities that typically took years for researchers to earn. These briefings revealed a new dimension of the challenges facing national security. Many military leaders understood the strategic importance of cybersecurity, but lacked the technical background to evaluate proposed solutions effectively. Sarah learned to translate complex technical concepts into language that non-specialists could understand, a skill that proved crucial for gaining support for her projects. The more Sarah learned about the nation's cybersecurity challenges, the more convinced she became that fundamental changes were necessary. The existing approach was largely reactive, responding to threats after they emerged rather than anticipating and preventing them. Her adaptive framework represented a shift toward proactive defense, but implementing it would require overcoming institutional resistance and bureaucratic inertia. Sarah's growing reputation brought both opportunities and challenges. She was promoted ahead of schedule and given increased responsibility for major projects. But her rapid advancement also increased scrutiny from colleagues who questioned whether her success was based on merit or favoritism, from senior officials who wanted to appear innovative. The pressure intensified when Sarah was selected to lead a team developing security protocols for a new generation of military communications systems. The project involved coordinating with multiple agencies and defense contractors, requiring skills that went far beyond technical expertise. Sarah had to learn project management, budget allocation, and stakeholder relations while continuing to advance the technical aspects of her work. Working with defense contractors proved particularly challenging. Many of these companies had been doing business with the government for decades and had established relationships that sometimes seemed to prioritize continuity over innovation. Sarah found herself advocating for solutions that threatened existing contracts and business models, creating conflicts with powerful interests that had significant influence within the defense establishment. The situation came to a head when Sarah identified serious security flaws in a communications system developed by Meridian Defense, a major contractor with extensive government connections. The flaws weren't immediately obvious and would likely go undetected during standard testing procedures, but they created vulnerabilities that sophisticated adversaries could exploit. Sarah's report on the Meridian system was technically sound but politically explosive. The company had invested millions in developing the system and had already received initial approval for deployment. Identifying these flaws at this stage would require significant delays and cost overruns that would embarrass both the contractor and the government officials who had approved the original design. The response to Sarah's findings revealed the complex dynamics of defense procurement. Some officials appreciated her thorough analysis and recognized the serious security implications of the vulnerabilities she had identified. Others questioned whether the flaws were significant enough to justify the costs and delays that would be required to fix them. Sarah found herself in the uncomfortable position of defending her technical analysis against challenges that were primarily political and financial, rather than scientific. She provided detailed documentation of the vulnerabilities and demonstrated how they could be exploited, but some decision-makers seemed more concerned about the implications for their budgets and timelines than about the potential security risks. The controversy surrounding the Meridian system taught Sarah important lessons about the intersection of technical excellence and organizational politics. She realized that being right wasn't sufficient if she couldn't build support for her positions among the people who had the authority to implement her recommendations. This realization led Sarah to develop new strategies for advancing her work. She began building relationships with allies throughout the organization, identifying people who shared her commitment to security excellence regardless of political considerations. She also learned to frame her technical recommendations in terms of their strategic benefits rather than simply pointing out problems with existing approaches. Sarah's evolving approach to her work reflected her growing understanding of how change happens in large organizations. Technical merit was necessary but not sufficient. She also needed to understand the incentives and constraints facing decision-makers and find ways to align her recommendations with their priorities. The combination of technical excellence and political sophistication began to pay dividends. Sarah's projects received increased funding and support, and her recommendations were implemented more consistently. She also found that her reputation was evolving from that of a brilliant but difficult critic to that of a valuable problem solver who could navigate complex challenges effectively. By her third year in government service, Sarah had established herself as one of the leading experts in adaptive cybersecurity systems. Her work was being studied by researchers around the world, and she was frequently invited to speak at international conferences. The recognition was gratifying, but Sarah remained focused on the practical applications of her research rather than academic acclaim. The real test of Sarah's growth came when she was offered the opportunity to lead a major initiative to overhaul cybersecurity protocols for critical military installations worldwide. The project would involve coordinating with dozens of agencies and contractors while managing a budget of hundreds of millions of dollars. Success would establish her as one of the most influential figures in national security technology, but failure would likely end her career in government service. Sarah accepted the challenge, understanding that this was the opportunity she had been preparing for throughout her career. The project would allow her to implement her adaptive security framework on a scale that could genuinely impact national security, but it would also expose her to scrutiny and criticism from every corner of the defense establishment. As Sarah prepared to take on this new responsibility, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. The quiet girl who had been ridiculed for her dedication to learning had become a nationally recognized expert whose work could influence the security of the entire nation. The isolation and criticism she had endured had taught her resilience and self-reliance that proved invaluable in navigating the challenges of government work. But Sarah also understood that her greatest challenges lay ahead. The project she was about to undertake would test every skill she had developed and require her to overcome resistance from people who had much more experience in bureaucratic warfare than she did. The success or failure of this initiative would determine whether her unconventional path to influence could truly make a difference in protecting the country she had come to serve. The call came on a Tuesday morning that would reshape Sarah's understanding of her role in national security. "Doctor." Walsh's voice carried an unusual urgency as she requested Sarah's immediate presence in her office. When Sarah arrived, she found Walsh sitting across from General Patricia Morrison, a woman whose reputation for strategic brilliance was matched only by her intolerance for incompetence. General Morrison studied Sarah with sharp grey eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail. After a moment of uncomfortable silence, she spoke in a voice that commanded attention without raising volume. "Dr. Chen, your work on adaptive cybersecurity has attracted attention at the highest levels of government. We have a situation that requires your specific expertise, but I need to understand whether you're prepared for an assignment that will test everything you think you know about your capabilities." Sarah felt her pulse quicken but maintained her composure. "I'm ready to serve wherever my skills can be most useful, General." The General exchanged a glance with Dr. Walsh before continuing. We've received intelligence indicating that several of our most secure military installations have been compromised by an advanced persistent threat. The attackers have been inside our networks for months, possibly years, without detection by our current security systems. Traditional forensic approaches have failed to identify the full scope of the breach or the methods being used. Dr. Walsh leaned forward, her expression grave. Sarah, this isn't just about fixing a security problem. If these installations have been compromised, virtually every aspect of our strategic defense capabilities could be exposed. We're talking about operational plans, personnel information, weapon specifications, and intelligence gathering methods. The implications for national security are almost incalculable. General Morrison placed a classified folder on the desk between them. Your adaptive framework is the only approach that's shown promise in identifying the attack vectors being used, but implementing it will require you to work directly with base commanders who may not appreciate having their security procedures questioned by someone they'll view as an outsider. Sarah understood the subtext immediately. She would be walking into hostile territory, both technologically and politically. Military base commanders were accustomed to absolute authority within their domains and wouldn't welcome scrutiny from a civilian researcher, especially one young enough to be their daughter. The first installation we need you to examine is Blackstone Air Force Base in Nevada, General Morrison continued. The base commander, Colonel Richard Hayes, is a decorated officer with 30 years of military experience. He's also convinced that his security measures are impenetrable and that this investigation is a waste of resources that could be better spent on operational readiness. Dr. Tundak Men Dar, Walsh added, Colonel Hayes has been told to cooperate with your investigation, but he's made it clear that he views this as an unnecessary disruption to his mission. You'll need to conduct your analysis while dealing with skepticism from people who outrank you and who have spent decades believing in the superiority of traditional military approaches to security. Sarah felt the familiar weight of being underestimated, but this time the stakes were exponentially higher than any academic or workplace conflict she had faced. What resources will I have access to? And what authority do I have to implement changes if I identify vulnerabilities? General Morrison's expression hardened. You'll have complete access to all systems and personnel necessary for your investigation. As for authority to implement changes, that's where things become complicated. You can make recommendations, but actual implementation will require convincing base personnel that changes are necessary. We can't simply override local commanders without creating morale and operational problems that could be worse than the security issues we're trying to fix. The challenge was becoming clear to Sarah. She would need to identify sophisticated cyber intrusions while navigating military hierarchy and culture that she didn't fully understand. Her technical expertise would be necessary but not sufficient. She would also need to build credibility and trust with people who had every reason to view her as a threat to their professional competence. Dr. Walsh handed Sarah a second folder containing background information on Blackstone Air Force Base. The base supports multiple classified missions, including testing of next-generation aircraft systems and coordination of satellite communications networks. Any compromise of their systems could provide adversaries with intelligence that could neutralize years of technological advantages. Sarah spent the next week preparing for her assignment by studying everything she could about military culture, base operations, and the specific technologies used at Blackstone. She also reviewed intelligence reports about the suspected intrusions, looking for patterns that might help her understand what she was dealing with. The intelligence was disturbing. The attackers demonstrated sophisticated understanding of both technical vulnerabilities and operational procedures. They had gained access to systems by exploiting flaws that required intimate knowledge of how military networks were configured and used. This suggested either insider involvement or adversaries with extensive intelligence about American military practices. Sarah's preparation included consultations with military personnel, who could help her understand the cultural dynamics she would encounter at Blackstone. Major Lisa Rodriguez, a cybersecurity specialist who had worked with civilian contractors, provided invaluable insights into how to approach base personnel without triggering defensive reactions. The key is demonstrating that you understand their mission and respect their expertise, Major Rodriguez explained. These are people who've dedicated their lives to defending the country, and they don't respond well to outsiders who seem to think they know better. But if you can show that you're there to help them succeed rather than to criticize their methods, you'll find that most of them are actually eager to learn. Major Rodriguez also warned Sarah about the specific challenges of working at Blackstone. Colonel Hayes is old-school military in every sense. He believes in chain of command, proven methods, and the superiority of experience over education. He's not stupid, but he's suspicious of innovation, especially from civilians who've never worn a uniform. Sarah's flight to Nevada gave her time to reflect on how much her life had changed since accepting government employment. 3 years earlier, she had been a graduate student whose biggest concern was defending her thesis. Now she was flying to a classified military installation with the authority to investigate security breaches that could affect national defense capabilities. Blackstone Air Force Base sprawled across the Nevada desert like a small city, its modern facilities contrasting sharply with the barren landscape surrounding it. As Sarah's escort drove her through the security checkpoints, she noticed the careful attention paid to her credentials and the obvious presence of security personnel throughout the facility. Colonel Hayes received her in his office, a space that reflected both his military precision and his skepticism about her mission. The walls were covered with commendations, photographs from his various assignments, and operational charts that demonstrated his comprehensive understanding of base activities. Hayes himself was exactly what Sarah had expected: tall, grey-haired, and carrying himself with the confidence of someone accustomed to being the final authority on all matters within his domain. "Dr. Chen," Hayes said, his tone professionally courteous but notably lacking warmth, "I've been instructed to provide you with complete cooperation in your investigation. I want to be clear that while I'll fulfill that obligation, I remain convinced that our security measures are among the most robust in the military. If there have been any intrusions, they're likely the result of human error rather than systematic vulnerabilities in our procedures." Sarah recognized the challenge immediately. Hayes wasn't just skeptical about her investigation. He was determined to prove that any problems she identified were isolated incidents rather than fundamental flaws in his security approach. This attitude would make her job significantly more difficult, because it meant that base personnel would be motivated to minimize rather than acknowledge potential vulnerabilities. "Colonel, I appreciate your cooperation, and I want to assure you that my goal is to enhance rather than criticize your security capabilities," Sarah replied carefully. "The threats we're dealing with are extremely sophisticated, and they're specifically designed to bypass traditional security measures that have proven effective against conventional attacks." Hayes nodded, but his expression remained unchanged. "Dr. Chen, I've been responsible for base security for over 5 years, and we've never had a confirmed intrusion. Our personnel are trained to the highest standards, our equipment is state-of-the-art, and our procedures are based on decades of military experience. I'm willing to let you examine our systems, but I expect you'll find that any alleged vulnerabilities are either theoretical concerns or the result of misinterpreted intelligence." The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Hayes providing a comprehensive overview of base security measures while subtly emphasizing the experience and expertise of his personnel. Sarah listened carefully, taking notes and asking clarifying questions that demonstrated her understanding of military operations while avoiding direct challenges to Hayes' authority. As the meeting concluded, Hayes assigned Major David Chen, no relation, to serve as Sarah's liaison during her investigation. Major Chen was a cybersecurity specialist with a computer science background who seemed more open to Sarah's presence than his commanding officer. As they walked toward the base's primary communications center, Major Chen provided additional context about the challenges Sarah would face. "The Colonel isn't wrong about our security record," Major Chen explained. "We've never had any obvious breaches, and our systems have passed every audit and inspection. But honestly, the attacks you're investigating sound more sophisticated than anything our current monitoring systems are designed to detect. If someone has been inside our networks for months without triggering any alarms, they're using methods that go beyond conventional intrusion techniques." Sarah spent her first day at Blackstone familiarizing herself with the base's network architecture and security protocols. The systems were indeed sophisticated, incorporating multiple layers of protection and monitoring capabilities that would defeat most conventional attacks. But as Sarah analyzed the network configurations, she began to identify potential attack vectors that could be exploited by adversaries with detailed knowledge of military communication protocols. The real breakthrough came when Sarah began applying her adaptive analysis framework to the base's network traffic patterns. Instead of looking for obvious signs of intrusion, her system examined subtle anomalies in data flows that might indicate the presence of sophisticated malware designed to remain undetected. The results were alarming. Sarah's analysis identified multiple indicators of advanced persistent threats that had been operating within the base's networks for at least 6 months. The attackers had gained access to communication systems, personnel databases, and operational planning documents without triggering any of the existing security alerts. Even more disturbing was the sophistication of the attack methods. The malware was designed to mimic legitimate network traffic and adapted its behavior based on the monitoring systems in place. This explained why traditional security measures had failed to detect the intrusions, The attackers were using the base's own security protocols against itself. Sarah documented her findings carefully, knowing that she would need compelling evidence to convince Colonel Hayes and his staff that their supposedly impregnable systems had been compromised. She also began developing recommendations for containment and remediation measures that would need to be implemented immediately to prevent further intelligence losses. The challenge came when Sarah requested a meeting with Colonel Hayes to present her preliminary findings. She could see the skepticism in his eyes as she explained her analysis methods and the evidence she had discovered. Hayes listened politely but interrupted frequently with questions that seemed designed to challenge her conclusions rather than understand her methodology. Dr. Chen. These anomalies you've identified could have any number of explanations, Hayes said, after reviewing her initial report. Network traffic patterns vary for many reasons, and what you're interpreting as evidence of intrusion might simply reflect normal operational variations that you're not familiar with because you lack experience with military communications systems. Sarah had anticipated this reaction and prepared comprehensive documentation to support her findings. She showed Hayes specific examples of data exfiltration, demonstrated how the malware was disguising its activities, and provided timeline analysis showing the progression of the attacks over several months. Major Chen, who had been observing the meeting quietly, finally spoke up. Colonel, Dr. Chen's analysis is consistent with the intelligence we received about sophisticated intrusions. Even if there's only a small possibility that our systems have been compromised, shouldn't we take immediate action to investigate further and implement additional protection measures? Hayes considered this for a long moment before responding. Major Chen raises a valid point. Dr. Chen, I'm still not convinced that your analysis proves we've been compromised, but I agree that we can't afford to ignore the possibility. What specific actions are you recommending, and what impact will they have on our operational capabilities? Sarah presented her containment and remediation plan, which included temporary network isolation, comprehensive forensic analysis, and implementation of enhanced monitoring systems based on her adaptive framework. The measures would require significant time and resources, and would temporarily disrupt some base operations, but they were necessary to confirm the scope of the intrusions and prevent further compromise. Colonel Hayes approved the implementation of Sarah's plan, though his agreement came with clear reservations about the disruption it would cause. Over the next several days, Sarah worked with base personnel to execute the containment measures while conducting detailed forensic analysis to map the full extent of the cyber intrusions. The forensic analysis confirmed Sarah's worst fears. The attackers had gained access to virtually every major system on the base, including classified operational plans, personnel records, and technical specifications for advanced aircraft systems. The scope of the compromise was so extensive that it effectively meant the base's entire mission had been transparent to adversaries for months. Even more troubling was evidence that the attackers had used their access to modify certain data, potentially compromising the integrity of mission-critical information. This went beyond simple espionage. The adversaries had been actively manipulating the base's information environment in ways that could affect operational decision-making. When Sarah presented these findings to Colonel Hayes, his reaction was notably different from his initial skepticism. The evidence was too comprehensive and too specific to dismiss as misinterpretation or theoretical concerns. Hayes realized that his base had suffered one of the most serious security breaches in recent military history, and that his confidence in existing security measures had been catastrophically misplaced. Dr. Chen, I owe you an apology, Hayes said after reviewing the forensic analysis. You've identified a threat that our systems completely failed to detect, and your quick action may have prevented even more serious intelligence losses. What do we need to do to secure our networks and prevent this from happening again? Sarah's recommendations for long-term security improvements were extensive and would require fundamental changes to how the base approached cybersecurity. Instead of relying primarily on perimeter defense and static monitoring systems, the base would need to implement adaptive security measures that could detect and respond to sophisticated threats in real time. The implementation process would take months and require retraining personnel, upgrading equipment, and developing new operational procedures. Colonel Hayes committed to providing whatever resources were necessary, understanding that the alternative was continued vulnerability to attacks that could compromise every aspect of the base's mission. As word of Sarah's success at Blackstone spread through military and intelligence communities, her reputation evolved from promising researcher to proven expert whose methods could address threats that conventional approaches had missed. The victory was personally satisfying, but Sarah understood that it was only the beginning of a much larger challenge. General Morrison's follow-up briefing confirmed Sarah's assessment. Intelligence analysis indicated that similar intrusions had likely occurred at multiple installations, and Sarah's adaptive security framework was the only approach that had proven capable of detecting these sophisticated attacks. She would need to conduct similar investigations at other bases while developing standardized procedures that could be implemented across the entire military network infrastructure. The success at Blackstone had also created new challenges for Sarah professionally. Military commanders who had initially viewed her with suspicion now sought her expertise. But they also expected immediate solutions to complex problems that had been developing for years. Sarah found herself managing expectations while trying to scale her methods to address threats across multiple installations simultaneously. More importantly, the Blackstone investigation had revealed the true scope of the cybersecurity challenges facing national defense. The attacks weren't isolated incidents conducted by opportunistic hackers. They were coordinated campaigns by sophisticated adversaries who had studied American military systems extensively and developed specific methods to exploit their vulnerabilities. Sarah realized that her role was evolving from researcher to strategic advisor whose work could influence fundamental approaches to national security. The quiet academic who had once been ridiculed for her dedication to learning was now responsible for protecting secrets that could determine the outcome of future conflicts. The transformation was both thrilling and terrifying, as Sarah understood that her decisions could have consequences far beyond anything she had previously imagined. Sarah's success at Blackstone Air Force Base had opened doors she never anticipated, but it also thrust her into a world of classified operations and international intrigue that challenged every assumption she had about her role in national security. Within days of completing her initial report, she received orders to brief senior Pentagon officials on her findings and recommendations for addressing similar threats across the military's global network infrastructure. The Pentagon briefing took place in a windowless conference room deep within the building's most secure sections. Sarah found herself presenting to an audience that included generals, admirals, intelligence directors, and senior civilian officials whose decisions affected national security policy at the highest levels. The weight of their attention was both intimidating and energizing as Sarah realized that her technical expertise could influence strategic decisions affecting the entire country. General Morrison introduced Sarah to the assembled officials with comments that emphasized both her unique qualifications and the severity of the threats she had uncovered. Dr. Chen's analysis at Blackstone revealed intrusions that our existing security measures failed to detect for months. Her adaptive framework represents our best hope for identifying and countering advanced persistent threats that are specifically designed to exploit conventional defense approaches. Sarah's presentation methodically documented the sophisticated attack methods discovered at Blackstone, emphasizing how the adversaries had studied American military systems extensively before developing customized intrusion techniques. The audience listened with growing concern as Sarah explained how the attackers had gained access to virtually every aspect of the base's operations, while remaining completely undetected by traditional security monitoring. Admiral Catherine Brooks, Director of Naval Intelligence, interrupted Sarah's presentation with a question that revealed the broader implications of her findings. Dr. Chen, based on your analysis of the attack methods used at Blackstone, how confident are you that similar intrusions could be occurring at other installations without our knowledge? Sarah had anticipated this question and prepared a careful response. Admiral Brooks, the techniques we observed were specifically designed to defeat standard military security protocols. Given that these protocols are used consistently across installations, I would assess the probability of similar intrusions at other locations as very high. The attackers demonstrated detailed knowledge of our systems and procedures that suggests extensive preparation and reconnaissance. The room fell silent as the implications of Sarah's assessment became clear. If similar intrusions were occurring at other installations, virtually every aspect of American military operations could be compromised. Intelligence gathered from multiple bases could provide adversaries with comprehensive understanding of strategic plans, weapons capabilities, and operational procedures that took decades to develop. General Patricia Morrison leaned forward, her expression grim. Dr. Chen, we need you to conduct immediate assessments at our most critical installations. Time is essential because every day these intrusions continue, more classified information is being compromised. How quickly can you deploy your analytical framework to other locations? Sarah understood that she was being asked to scale her methods across multiple installations simultaneously, a challenge that would require resources and support far beyond anything she had previously managed. General, conducting thorough assessments will require teams of analysts trained in my adaptive methodology. We'll also need specialized equipment and access to classified systems at each location. With adequate support, I estimate we could begin assessments at multiple installations within 2 weeks. The discussion that followed revealed the complex logistical and political challenges of implementing Sarah's recommendations across the military's global network infrastructure. Each installation had its own command structure, operational requirements, and security procedures that would need to be adapted to accommodate her investigative methods. Secretary of Defense Michael Harrison, who had been listening quietly throughout the briefing, finally spoke. Dr. Chen, I'm authorizing the creation of a special task force with you as the technical director. You'll have authority to conduct security assessments at any military installation, access to whatever resources you need, and direct communication with my office regarding your findings. This is now a top priority for the Department of Defense. The creation of the Adaptive Cybersecurity Task Force represented a dramatic expansion of Sarah's responsibilities and authority. Within days, she found herself managing a team of analysts, coordinating with installation commanders worldwide, and briefing senior officials on threats that could fundamentally compromise national security. The task force's first major deployment was to 3 installations simultaneously: Ramstein Air Base in Germany, Naval Station Norfolk in Virginia, and Yokota Air Base in Japan. Each location presented unique challenges, both technical and cultural, that tested Sarah's ability to adapt her methods to different operational environments. Ramstein Air Base served as the primary hub for American air operations in Europe, coordinating missions that supported NATO allies and monitored potential threats from Eastern Europe and the Middle East. The base commander, Brigadier General William Foster, had been briefed on Sarah's findings at Blackstone and was more receptive to her investigation than Colonel Hayes had initially been. However, Ramstein's position as a joint NATO facility complicated Sarah's analysis because the base's networks interfaced with Allied systems that operated under different security protocols. The potential for compromise extended beyond American military secrets to include intelligence sharing arrangements and operational coordination with European partners. Sarah's team at Ramstein discovered intrusions that were even more sophisticated than those found at Blackstone. The attackers had exploited the complexity of international network interfaces to gain access not only to American systems, but also to communications between NATO allies. The implications were staggering because compromise of Allied intelligence could damage relationships that formed the foundation of American security policy in Europe. Major Elena Kowalski, Sarah's liaison at Ramstein, helped her understand the diplomatic sensitivities involved in investigating Allied network security. Dr. Chen, if we've been compromised, our allies need to know immediately so they can protect their own systems. But we also can't afford to damage their confidence in American security practices, because that could undermine cooperation on critical missions. The analysis at Naval Station Norfolk revealed different but equally troubling vulnerabilities. The installation served as headquarters for the Atlantic Fleet and coordinated submarine operations that formed a crucial component of American strategic deterrence. Compromise of Norfolk systems could provide adversaries with intelligence about submarine movements, nuclear weapons deployments, and strategic planning that could neutralize decades of technological and operational advantages. Captain Sarah Mitchell, Norfolk's cybersecurity director, worked closely with Sarah's team to understand the scope of the intrusions discovered at the base. The attackers had gained access to submarine deployment schedules, weapons loading procedures, and communication protocols used for coordinating with other naval installations worldwide. The strategic implications are almost incalculable, Captain Mitchell explained during a secure video conference with Pentagon officials. If adversaries know our submarine positions and operational patterns, they can develop countermeasures that could eliminate our strategic deterrence capabilities. This goes beyond intelligence gathering to actual neutralization of critical defense assets. The investigation at Yokota Air Base in Japan revealed how adversaries were exploiting American military presence in the Pacific to gather intelligence about regional defense strategies and alliance relationships. The base served as a critical node for coordinating with Japanese and South Korean allies while monitoring potential threats from China and North Korea. Colonel James Park, Yokota's commander, initially expressed concern that Sarah's investigation might reveal sensitive information to personnel who lacked appropriate clearances for regional intelligence operations. However, Sarah's team discovered that adversaries had already gained access to much of this information through their network intrusions, making secrecy less important than immediate remediation. The intrusions at Yokota demonstrated how adversaries were using their access to American military networks to gather intelligence about Allied capabilities and defense planning. This information could enable potential enemies to develop strategies that exploited weaknesses in Allied coordination while avoiding American and Allied strengths. Sarah coordinated the investigations at all 3 installations through secure communications that allowed her team to share findings and identify patterns across different operational environments. The analysis revealed that the intrusions were part of a coordinated campaign by sophisticated adversaries who had studied American military systems extensively before developing customized attack methods for different types of installations. The technical sophistication of the attacks was matched by their strategic sophistication. The adversaries hadn't simply gained access to classified information. They had specifically targeted intelligence that could provide comprehensive understanding of American military capabilities, operational procedures, and alliance relationships. This suggested coordination at the highest levels of foreign intelligence services with extensive resources and long-term strategic planning. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, who had been monitoring Sarah's progress from Washington, expressed growing concern about the implications of her findings during a secure briefing with senior Pentagon officials. The scope and sophistication of these intrusions suggest that we're dealing with a threat that goes beyond conventional cybersecurity challenges. This appears to be a systematic effort to compromise the fundamental basis of American military superiority. Sarah's analysis identified specific indicators that suggested the intrusions were being conducted by foreign intelligence services rather than independent hacker groups or criminal organizations. The attack methods required detailed knowledge of American military systems, extensive preparation time, and resources that were typically available only to nation-state actors. More troubling was evidence that the adversaries were sharing intelligence gathered from different installations to develop comprehensive understanding of American military operations worldwide. Communications intercepted during the investigation suggested that information from European installations was being combined with intelligence from Pacific bases to create detailed maps of global American defense postures. The investigation also revealed that adversaries were using their access to modify certain data, potentially compromising the integrity of intelligence used for strategic planning. This went beyond passive espionage to active information warfare, designed to degrade American decision-making capabilities while remaining undetected. Sarah's team developed countermeasures that successfully contained the intrusions at all three installations, but the remediation process revealed additional vulnerabilities that required fundamental changes to military cybersecurity protocols. The existing approach of relying primarily on perimeter defense and static monitoring systems was inadequate against adversaries who had specifically studied and developed methods to defeat these protections. The success of the task force's initial deployments led to requests for additional investigations at installations worldwide. Sarah found herself managing simultaneous operations across 4 continents, while developing standardized procedures that could be implemented consistently across different operational environments. The expansion of operations also required Sarah to build relationships with international partners, whose installations interfaced with American networks. Allied officials needed to understand the threats their systems faced while maintaining confidence in American security capabilities and commitment to shared defense. During a classified briefing with NATO intelligence officials in Brussels, Sarah presented findings that demonstrated how adversaries were exploiting alliance networks to gather intelligence about collective defense planning. The revelations created tension between the need for immediate security improvements and concerns about maintaining the trust and cooperation essential for effective alliance operations. General Morrison accompanied Sarah to the Brussels briefing to provide high-level political support for her technical recommendations. Dr. Chen's analysis has revealed threats that challenge fundamental assumptions about network security in alliance environments. We need your cooperation in implementing protective measures, but we also recognize that these revelations create concerns about American security practices. The international dimension of the cybersecurity challenges forced Sarah to develop diplomatic skills that complemented her technical expertise. She learned to present sensitive findings in ways that encouraged cooperation rather than defensiveness, while maintaining the urgency necessary for effective response to ongoing threats. The investigation also revealed that some Allied systems had been compromised through their connections to American networks, creating legal and political complications that required careful coordination between intelligence services and diplomatic officials. Sarah found herself briefing not only military commanders but also ambassadors and senior government officials whose decisions affected international relationships. The complexity of managing simultaneous investigations while coordinating with multiple agencies and international partners tested Sarah's organizational and leadership capabilities in ways that her academic training hadn't anticipated. She learned to delegate technical analysis while maintaining oversight of strategic decisions that could affect national security policies. The success of the Adaptive Cybersecurity Task Force also created new challenges, as other agencies requested Sarah's assistance with their own security concerns. The intelligence community wanted her to analyze threats to classified communication systems, while civilian agencies sought help protecting critical infrastructure from similar sophisticated attacks. Sarah realized that her work was expanding beyond military cybersecurity to encompass broader questions about national resilience in an era of sophisticated cyber warfare. The methods she had developed for detecting advanced threats in military networks were equally applicable to protecting civilian systems that supported economic and social stability. The recognition of Sarah's expertise brought opportunities to influence policy at the highest levels of government, but it also increased scrutiny from adversaries who understood that her capabilities posed significant threats to their intelligence operations. Security officials warned Sarah that she might become a target for foreign intelligence services seeking to neutralize her effectiveness or gather intelligence about American cybersecurity capabilities. The personal risks associated with her work forced Sarah to adapt to security measures that affected every aspect of her daily life. She underwent training in personal security procedures, modified her travel patterns, and accepted protection details for high-profile appearances where her presence might be known to foreign intelligence services. Despite the personal and professional challenges, Sarah remained committed to expanding her work to address the full scope of cybersecurity threats facing the country. The investigation of military installations had revealed vulnerabilities that extended throughout government and civilian networks, creating opportunities to implement comprehensive protective measures that could enhance national security across multiple domains. The transformation from academic researcher to national security advisor had required Sarah to develop capabilities she never anticipated needing, but the impact of her work validated the importance of applying innovative approaches to critical challenges. The girl who had been ridiculed for her dedication to learning was now protecting secrets that could determine the outcome of future conflicts, using methods that represented fundamental advances in cybersecurity technology. The morning of March 15th began like any other day for Sarah, but it would end with her standing at the gates of Evergreen Mountain Base in Colorado, facing the most critical test of her career and the moment that would forever change how the military viewed cybersecurity expertise. She had been summoned to investigate what intelligence officials described as the most sophisticated cyber intrusion ever detected on American soil, one that threatened to compromise the nation's most classified defense programs. Evergreen Mountain Base housed the Joint Strategic Command Center, where senior military officials coordinated global defense operations and maintained communication with the president during national security crises. The facility was considered virtually impregnable, protected by multiple layers of physical and electronic security that had been developed over decades of continuous improvement. The call had come directly from General Morrison at 3 a.m, her voice tense with urgency. "Sarah, we have a situation at Evergreen that requires your immediate attention. Intelligence suggests that adversaries have gained access to systems that control our strategic nuclear communications. If this is accurate, every aspect of our nuclear deterrence capabilities could be compromised." Sarah understood the implications immediately. Compromise of nuclear command and control systems could provide adversaries with intelligence about American nuclear capabilities, deployment strategies, and communication protocols that formed the foundation of strategic deterrence. More troubling was the possibility that adversaries could manipulate these systems to disrupt American nuclear response capabilities during a crisis. The flight to Colorado gave Sarah time to review classified intelligence reports about the suspected intrusion, but the information was fragmentary and contradictory. Some indicators suggested sophisticated malware designed specifically to target nuclear command systems, while others pointed to more conventional intrusion techniques that had somehow bypassed multiple layers of security. What made the situation particularly urgent was intelligence suggesting that adversaries were planning to activate dormant malware during an upcoming international crisis that could require American nuclear forces to demonstrate readiness. If the malware functioned as designed, it could prevent American nuclear systems from responding appropriately to strategic threats, potentially inviting aggression from adversaries who believed American deterrent capabilities had been neutralized. Colonel Patricia Williams met Sarah at the base entrance, her expression reflecting the gravity of the situation they faced. Williams commanded Evergreen's Cybersecurity Division and had overseen the implementation of security measures that were considered the most advanced in the military. The discovery of potential intrusions had shaken her confidence in systems she had believed were essentially unassailable. "Dr. Chen, I want you to know that our security protocols here exceed those at any other installation," Colonel Williams said as they drove toward the command center. "We have multiple redundant systems, constant monitoring, and personnel who are cleared at the highest levels. If someone has penetrated our networks, they've overcome protections that we thought were theoretically impossible to defeat." The Joint Strategic Command Center occupied a massive underground complex that extended several levels below the mountain's surface. The facility was designed to survive nuclear attacks while maintaining communication with American forces worldwide and coordination with political leadership in Washington. The cybersecurity implications of any compromise were amplified by the facility's critical role in national defense planning. Sarah's initial assessment of Evergreen's security architecture revealed systems that were indeed more sophisticated than anything she had encountered previously. The networks were isolated from external connections through multiple layers of air-gap protections, monitored by artificial intelligence systems that analyzed traffic patterns in real time, and protected by encryption methods that were theoretically unbreakable using conventional computational approaches. However, Sarah's adaptive analysis framework began identifying subtle anomalies that suggested sophisticated intrusion techniques designed specifically to operate within these highly secure environments. The malware appeared to be using previously unknown vulnerabilities in the hardware itself, exploiting flaws in the manufacturing process that allowed adversaries to bypass software-based security measures entirely. Major Douglas Chen, Sarah's technical liaison at Evergreen, had extensive experience with nuclear command systems, but admitted that the intrusion methods being used exceeded his understanding of what was technologically possible. Dr. Chen, the anomalies you're identifying suggest attack methods that go beyond anything in our threat assessment models. If adversaries have developed these capabilities, our fundamental assumptions about secure communications may be completely obsolete. Sarah's analysis revealed that the intrusions at Evergreen were significantly more advanced than those discovered at other installations. The attackers had gained access not only to nuclear command communications, but also to systems that controlled the physical security of nuclear weapons storage facilities. This meant that adversaries potentially had intelligence about nuclear weapons locations, security procedures, and transportation schedules that could enable physical attacks on American nuclear assets. The scope of the compromise became clear when Sarah's team discovered that adversaries had gained access to the Emergency Action Message System, which transmitted nuclear launch authorizations from the president to military commanders. The attackers had implanted malware that could potentially intercept, modify, or block these critical communications during a nuclear crisis. This represents the most serious security breach in American history, Colonel Williams admitted during a secure briefing with Pentagon officials. If adversaries can manipulate our nuclear command systems, they could potentially prevent us from responding to strategic threats or trick us into believing that nuclear launch orders have been issued when they haven't. The investigation also revealed that adversaries had used their access to gather intelligence about Allied nuclear cooperation, including information about nuclear weapons sharing arrangements with NATO allies and coordination procedures for joint nuclear operations. This intelligence could enable adversaries to develop strategies for neutralizing collective nuclear deterrence by disrupting coordination between American and Allied forces. Sarah worked 18-hour days for a week, coordinating with nuclear weapons experts, intelligence analysts, and cybersecurity specialists to map the full extent of the intrusions and develop containment measures that wouldn't disrupt critical command functions. The challenge was enormous, because any interruption to nuclear command systems during the current international tensions could be interpreted as either technical failure or evidence of hostile attack. The breakthrough came when Sarah's team identified the specific hardware vulnerabilities being exploited by the adversaries. The malware was embedded in the firmware of communication processors that had been manufactured by a company with suspected links to foreign intelligence services. These processors were used throughout the nuclear command system, creating vulnerabilities that existed from the moment the equipment was installed. "We're dealing with supply chain compromise at the most fundamental level," Sarah explained during an emergency briefing with senior Pentagon officials. "The adversaries didn't need to penetrate our networks because they were already inside our hardware before we even installed it. This represents a completely new category of strategic threat that requires rethinking our entire approach to secure communications." The discovery that nuclear command systems had been compromised through hardware manipulation created panic at the highest levels of government. President Victoria Harrison was briefed personally by the Secretary of Defense about the implications for American nuclear deterrent capabilities, and emergency consultations were held with key allies who relied on American nuclear protection. General Morrison authorized Sarah to implement emergency containment measures that included temporarily isolating nuclear command systems while replacement hardware was manufactured using verified supply chains. The isolation procedures were extremely complex because they required maintaining nuclear readiness while preventing adversaries from activating their implanted malware. The containment process revealed additional layers of the adversary's planning. The malware was designed to activate only during specific circumstances that suggested imminent nuclear conflict, meaning that American officials might not discover the compromise until the moment when nuclear command systems were most critical for national survival. Sarah's team worked around the clock to develop alternative command procedures that could maintain nuclear deterrent credibility while the compromised systems were being replaced. This required coordination with nuclear weapons storage facilities, submarine commanders, and strategic bomber units to ensure that nuclear forces remained responsive to legitimate commands while being protected from potential manipulation. The scope of the remediation effort required manufacturing new communication hardware using completely verified supply chains, a process that normally took months but needed to be completed within weeks due to the ongoing international crisis. Sarah found herself coordinating with defense contractors, intelligence agencies, and senior military officials to expedite production while maintaining the security measures necessary to prevent further compromise. During this critical period, intelligence reports indicated that adversaries were preparing to test American nuclear resolve through military actions that could escalate to strategic conflict. The timing appeared designed to exploit the window when American nuclear command systems were potentially compromised, suggesting that the cyber intrusions were part of a broader strategic plan to neutralize American deterrent capabilities. The pressure on Sarah was enormous, because any failure to properly secure nuclear command systems could result in strategic surprise that could affect the outcome of international conflicts. She found herself briefing the president's national security advisors about technical issues that could determine whether nuclear deterrence remained credible during the most dangerous international crisis since the Cold War. The replacement of compromised hardware at Evergreen required unprecedented coordination between cybersecurity experts, nuclear weapons specialists, and intelligence analysts. Sarah's team had to ensure that new systems were secure while maintaining the operational continuity necessary for effective nuclear command and control. The successful completion of the remediation at Evergreen demonstrated that Sarah's adaptive cybersecurity framework could address threats that exceeded conventional security planning. However, the discovery of supply chain compromise in nuclear command systems raised fundamental questions about the security of critical infrastructure throughout the government and defense establishment. Sarah's work at Evergreen attracted attention from the highest levels of government as officials realized that cybersecurity expertise had become as critical as nuclear weapons technology for maintaining strategic deterrence. Her methods for detecting and countering advanced threats were recognized as essential capabilities for protecting national security in an era of sophisticated cyber warfare. The success at Evergreen also created new responsibilities for Sarah, as senior officials requested her assessment of cybersecurity vulnerabilities throughout the nuclear weapons complex. She found herself coordinating with facilities that manufactured nuclear weapons, maintained nuclear submarines, and operated strategic bomber bases to ensure that the entire nuclear deterrent infrastructure was protected from similar threats. The international implications of the Evergreen investigation were equally significant, as Allied officials needed to understand whether their own nuclear cooperation with the United States had been compromised. Sarah briefed NATO officials about the supply chain vulnerabilities discovered in American systems, while helping them assess whether similar threats existed in their own nuclear infrastructure. The revelation that adversaries had developed capabilities to compromise nuclear command systems through hardware manipulation fundamentally changed how national security officials thought about cybersecurity threats. Sarah's work demonstrated that protecting critical infrastructure required understanding not only software vulnerabilities, but also the entire supply chain for hardware components. The success at Evergreen established Sarah as the government's leading expert on advanced cybersecurity threats, but it also made her a target for foreign intelligence services who understood that her capabilities posed significant threats to their strategic plans. Security officials implemented comprehensive protection measures for Sarah and her team members who had access to the most sensitive cybersecurity intelligence. The personal risks associated with her work forced Sarah to accept limitations on her freedom that she had never anticipated when entering government service. Her communications were monitored for security threats, her travel was restricted to prevent kidnapping or assassination attempts, and her personal relationships were scrutinized to ensure they couldn't be exploited by foreign intelligence services. Despite these constraints, Sarah remained committed to expanding her cybersecurity work to address the full scope of threats facing critical infrastructure. The investigation at Evergreen had revealed vulnerabilities that extended beyond military systems to include civilian infrastructure that supported economic stability and social cohesion. The recognition of Sarah's expertise led to requests for assistance from agencies responsible for protecting power grids, financial networks, and transportation systems that could be targeted by adversaries using similar advanced techniques. Sarah realized that her work was expanding from military cybersecurity to comprehensive national resilience against sophisticated cyber warfare. The transformation from academic researcher to guardian of national security had required Sarah to develop capabilities she never anticipated needing. But the impact of her work validated the importance of applying innovative approaches to the most critical challenges facing the country. The investigation at Evergreen represented the culmination of her evolution from isolated student to indispensable national asset whose expertise could determine the outcome of strategic conflicts. The morning Sarah arrived at Fort Meridian's main gate would become legendary in military cybersecurity circles, not for the sophisticated threats she would uncover, but for how a group of guards' dismissive laughter would transform into shocked silence when they realized they had just mocked the most powerful cybersecurity authority in the United States government. Fort Meridian served as the headquarters for the newly created Cyber Defense Command, a joint military organization responsible for coordinating cybersecurity across all branches of the armed forces. The base had been chosen for this critical mission precisely because of its reputation for operational excellence and its sophisticated security infrastructure that had never been successfully compromised. Sarah's visit to Fort Meridian was intended as a routine inspection to validate the security protocols being implemented across the military's global network infrastructure. Her adaptive cybersecurity framework had become the standard for protecting critical military systems, and her team was conducting assessments to ensure consistent implementation across different operational environments. The day began with an early flight from Washington, followed by a drive through the Virginia countryside to Fort Meridian's imposing entrance. Sarah traveled in civilian clothes, carrying only a briefcase containing her credentials and preliminary analysis materials. Her security detail maintained discreet surveillance while allowing her to approach the base independently, as was her preference for initial assessments. The main gate at Fort Meridian was staffed by military police who were responsible for controlling access to one of the most secure installations in the military network. The guards were accustomed to dealing with high-ranking officials, defense contractors, and visiting dignitaries who required special security procedures and escort protocols. When Sarah approached the guard station, her appearance immediately triggered assumptions that would prove catastrophically wrong. She was young, casually dressed, and carrying what appeared to be a simple briefcase rather than the formal documentation typically associated with senior officials. The guards saw a woman who looked like a lost tourist rather than someone with the authority to shut down their entire operation. Sergeant Michael Torres, the senior guard on duty, looked up from his security console with barely concealed irritation. "Ma'am, this is a restricted military installation. If you're looking for the visitor center, you need to continue down the main road for about 2 miles. Sarah approached the window and presented her credentials with the quiet confidence that had become her trademark. "Sergeant Torres. I'm Dr. D. Sarah Chen from the Adaptive Cybersecurity Task Force. I'm here to conduct a security assessment of your network infrastructure." Torres examined Sarah's identification with obvious skepticism, comparing her youthful appearance to the senior-level access permissions indicated on her credentials. The disconnect between her appearance and her supposed authority seemed too significant to accept without additional verification. "Ma'am, these credentials indicate you have Yankee White clearance and authority to access all base systems," Torres said, his voice reflecting disbelief. "Are you sure you have the right identification? Maybe there's been some kind of mistake." Private Jennifer Walsh, who had been observing the interaction from her position at the vehicle checkpoint, couldn't suppress a laugh. "Sarge, she probably grabbed someone else's ID by accident. Look at her. She's maybe 25 years old and dressed like she's going to the mall." "You think they give that kind of clearance to someone who looks like she should be asking for directions to the student union?" Sarah maintained her composure despite the guard's obvious amusement at her expense. She had encountered similar reactions countless times throughout her career and had learned that the best response was professional persistence rather than defensive anger. "Sergeant Torres, I understand your skepticism, but I need you to verify my credentials through your security system. My visit was coordinated through the Pentagon, and I'm expected at the Cyber Defense Command Center at 0900 hours. Torres entered Sarah's identification information into the security verification system, expecting the computer to confirm his suspicions that something was wrong with her credentials. Instead, the system immediately flagged Sarah's profile as requiring special handling procedures reserved for officials with the highest levels of security access and operational authority. The computer screen displayed information that made Torres's eyes widen with shock. Dr. Sarah Chen, Director of the Adaptive Cybersecurity Task Force, reporting directly to the Secretary of Defense, with authority to conduct unannounced security assessments at any military installation worldwide. Her clearance level exceeded that of most general officers, and her access permissions included systems that Torres didn't even know existed at Fort Meridian. Private Walsh, who had been continuing her commentary about Sarah's appearance, suddenly found herself reading over Torres's shoulder as the full scope of Sarah's authority became clear. The system indicated that Sarah had the power to order immediate security lockdowns, restrict access to classified systems, and direct the activities of base commanders during cybersecurity investigations. Holy shit, Walsh whispered, her earlier amusement replaced by growing horror as she realized the magnitude of their mistake. Sarge, she really is who she says she is. And according to this system, she has authority to... Wait. It says here she can order immediate operational shutdowns if she identifies security threats. Torres felt his stomach drop as he fully comprehended what he was reading. Doctor. Sarah Chen wasn't just another cybersecurity expert conducting routine inspections. She was the person responsible for protecting the military's most critical systems from threats that could compromise national security. Her work had been briefed at the highest levels of military command, and her methods had become the standard for cybersecurity across the entire defense establishment. The verification system also displayed Sarah's recent activities, including her investigations at installations worldwide and her successful identification of sophisticated intrusions that had completely evaded conventional security measures. Torres realized that he was looking at the professional record of someone whose expertise had literally saved national security secrets from foreign adversaries. Dr. Chen, We apologize for the delay, Torres stammered, his professional composure cracking as he understood that his skeptical questioning could be interpreted as obstructing a critical national security operation. Your credentials are verified, and we're prepared to provide whatever assistance you require. Sarah noticed the dramatic change in the guard's demeanor, but chose not to comment on their earlier skepticism. She had learned that humiliating people who had underestimated her often created lasting resentment that could complicate her work, while professional graciousness usually converted former skeptics into strong supporters. Thank you, Sergeant Torres. I'll need access to the Cyber Defense Command Center and coordination with Colonel Martinez regarding my assessment activities. Is there someone who can escort me to the appropriate briefing room? Torres immediately contacted the base's command center to report Sarah's arrival and request escort services. His call created a cascade of activity throughout Fort Meridian as senior officers realized that the military's most influential cybersecurity expert was conducting an unannounced assessment of their operations. Within minutes, Colonel Eduardo Martinez arrived at the gate personally to escort Sarah to the command center. Martinez was a seasoned officer who had been briefed extensively on Sarah's work and understood both her technical expertise and her influence within the highest levels of government. Dr. Farron, Chen, welcome to Fort Meridian, Martinez said with the respectful professionalism appropriate for someone of Sarah's stature. We're honored to host your assessment, and we've prepared comprehensive briefings on our cybersecurity protocols and current threat assessments. As Sarah's vehicle passed through the gate toward the command center, Torres and Walsh watched in stunned silence, finally comprehending the full magnitude of their initial reaction to her appearance. They had dismissed and mocked someone whose expertise was considered critical for protecting national security, someone whose recommendations could influence policy at the Pentagon and White House. Private Walsh felt nauseated as she replayed her comments about Sarah's appearance and credentials. Sarge, do you think she'll report how we acted when she first arrived? I mean, we basically accused her of stealing someone's ID and told her she looked like a lost college student. Torres was considering the same question with growing anxiety. Dr. Chen's authority included the ability to evaluate security procedures and personnel performance as part of her cybersecurity assessments. Their initial skepticism could be interpreted as a security failure that compromised proper verification procedures for high-level officials. However, Sarah's reputation for professionalism and focus on substantive security issues rather than personal slights provided some reassurance. Officers who had worked with her reported that she was more interested in fixing security problems than punishing people for honest mistakes, as long as those mistakes didn't indicate systematic failures in security culture. The briefing at the Cyber Defense Command Center demonstrated why Sarah's visit was so significant for Fort Meridian's mission. The base was responsible for coordinating cybersecurity across installations worldwide, making it a critical node in the military's defense against sophisticated cyber threats. Any vulnerabilities at Fort Meridian could compromise the security of the entire global network infrastructure. Sarah's assessment revealed that Fort Meridian's security measures were generally effective but included subtle vulnerabilities that could be exploited by adversaries using the advanced techniques she had discovered at other installations. The vulnerabilities weren't immediately obvious and probably wouldn't be detected by conventional security assessments, but they created potential attack vectors that sophisticated adversaries could exploit. Colonel Martinez appreciated both the thoroughness of Sarah's analysis and her constructive approach to identifying improvements. Dr. Chen, your assessment has identified issues that our internal evaluations completely missed. How quickly can we implement the countermeasures you're recommending? Sarah's recommendations included both immediate tactical improvements and longer-term strategic changes that would enhance Fort Meridian's ability to detect and counter advanced threats. The implementation would require coordination with multiple agencies and significant resource allocation, but the improvements would substantially strengthen the base's cybersecurity posture. The success of Sarah's assessment at Fort Meridian contributed to the broader recognition of her adaptive cybersecurity framework as the most effective approach for protecting critical military systems. Her methods were being implemented at installations worldwide, and her team was training cybersecurity specialists to use her techniques for ongoing threat detection and response. The international cybersecurity community had also recognized Sarah's contributions to defending against sophisticated threats. She was invited to brief allied intelligence services, participate in international cybersecurity conferences, and collaborate with researchers worldwide who were developing similar approaches to adaptive defense systems. The personal vindication of seeing former skeptics acknowledge her expertise was satisfying, but Sarah remained focused on the substantive challenges of protecting critical infrastructure from evolving threats. The cybersecurity landscape was changing rapidly as adversaries developed new techniques for exploiting vulnerabilities in increasingly complex systems. Sarah's work had expanded beyond military cybersecurity to include protection of civilian infrastructure that supported economic stability and social cohesion. Power grids, financial networks, and communication systems all required protection from adversaries who understood that disrupting civilian infrastructure could achieve strategic objectives without directly attacking military targets. The recognition of Sarah's expertise had also created new opportunities for influencing cybersecurity policy at the highest levels of government. She regularly briefed senior officials about emerging threats and recommended changes to national cybersecurity strategy that could enhance resilience across multiple domains. The transformation from ridiculed academic to nationally recognized expert had required Sarah to develop capabilities she never anticipated needing when she began her career. Technical excellence had been necessary but not sufficient. She had also needed to learn leadership, diplomacy, and strategic thinking to navigate the complex challenges of implementing innovative approaches within established institutions. The journey had been personally challenging, as Sarah sacrificed the relative simplicity of academic life for the complexities and responsibilities of national service. Her work required constant vigilance against threats that could compromise national security, and her expertise made her a target for foreign adversaries who understood the threat she represented to their strategic plans. Despite the challenges, Sarah found deep satisfaction in knowing that her work was protecting the country from threats that could undermine the fundamental basis of national security. The girl who had been mocked for her dedication to learning was now responsible for safeguarding secrets that could determine the outcome of future conflicts. The morning at Fort Meridian's gate had become symbolic of Sarah's broader journey from underestimated outsider to indispensable national asset. The guard's initial skepticism and subsequent recognition represented the experience she had encountered throughout her career. People who judged her based on superficial characteristics eventually learned to respect her based on the substance of her contributions. Looking back on that moment, Sarah realized that the guards' reaction had provided a perfect microcosm of the challenges she had faced and overcome throughout her career. Their laughter had quickly turned to shocked recognition when they understood who she actually was and what authority she wielded. The incident also reminded Sarah of how far she had traveled. From the isolated student who had been ridiculed by classmates for her dedication to academic excellence, the quiet girl who had spent lunch periods in the library had become the person responsible for protecting the nation's most critical secrets from sophisticated adversaries who threatened fundamental aspects of national security. The vindication was complete, but Sarah understood that her most important work lay ahead as cybersecurity threats continued to evolve and new challenges emerged that would require all the expertise and determination she had developed throughout her remarkable journey from academic obscurity to national prominence. The laughter at the gate had become a distant memory, replaced by the respect and recognition appropriate for someone whose expertise could determine the fate of nations.